Sorry about that. I thought I was going at the end of this set, so that's why I was out there doing my hermiting thing. So I feel like we should all take a collective breath because this is the heaviest story I have to tell. This is the second time I've been at the Slam, and I've told nothing but heavy stories, so let's all breathe real quick. Okay, thank you for that. So it's May 19th of 2012, and I wake up around noon on a Saturday. I work second shift, and I wake up to all these texts, missed phone calls. I have voicemails on my phone, people texting me saying, if you need anything, let me know. I'm here for you, whatever you need. I have no clue what's going on. I hop on social media. That's blowing up. People are posting that I graduated high school with, that my cousins passed away. No one in my family's reached out to me. So I am on Facebook still, and I find my cousin's Facebook page, and my aunt's gotten onto it, and she used his page to vividly describe in detail and in a very sensationalizing way how my cousin committed suicide and had killed himself. This is the story of how I lost my cousin to suicide, how I was eventually blamed for it, and then barred from the funeral. So growing up, I grew up about less than 3 miles away from 3 of my cousins. My sister and I would go play with them all the time. We were always attached at the hip since we were kids. The cousin that I lost, we ended up graduating together, and as teenagers, we're always attached at the hip, doing theater, plays, church stuff, you name it, we were always hanging out. So there's some context of our relationship growing up. In 2011, I came out as queer, and we had a falling out around that time. Looking back, I can see why. There was an incident in the fall of 2011 when I came out to my grandmother. My cousin got involved, and I got home from coming out to my grandmother, and I have voicemails from my uncle telling me, if you harass your grandmother anymore and bully her, we're going to call the cops on you. So I had to cease contact, needless to say, with my cousin and my aunt and my uncle. It was the best for my safety. A couple weeks before he had passed, he had sent some texts to me that weren't too great, and I never responded to him. So I've always had that I've carried with me as well. I bring up coming out as queer because I'm still the only out queer person in my family, and I think that's partially why I got targeted. I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure we lost my cousin to suicide because of homophobia and because he was being closeted. So of course, when it rains, it pours, and the day that he's supposed to have his viewing is the day after I'm supposed to have a tonsillectomy. And I had been living with an abscessed tonsil for about a year, so it really had to come out. So I go over to my grandmother's house to talk about the arrangements for my cousin, and then also about she was supposed to take me to the hospital for my surgery. And I'm sitting there in the room with her, and my aunt's not in the room, and she uses my grandmother to tell me, I'm to blame, and you're not allowed at the funeral. And I get up and do something that I normally don't do with my grandmother. I get up and yell at her and cuss her out, and I storm out of her house. And as I storm out of her house, I'll never forget these words. I still love my grandmother. I gotta put that out there. I still love my grandmother, but I'll never forget these words. Now don't go starting trouble. And I remember turning back around and I said, Grandma, I'm not the one stirring up trouble. And I left. I was so upset, I went home, I cried. I called my grandma, I said, I don't want you taking me to the hospital. She got so upset, she went and talked to my aunt and begged for me to get some time at the viewing. The best that she could do was 20 minutes with my dead cousin in a casket before the viewing started. Now, my cousin and I graduated together, and I lived in rural Indiana, so everyone in my hometown was going to be at that viewing, and I wasn't allowed to be there. There were some family members that really tried to fight for me to get the opportunity to be there, but to no avail, it didn't happen. I don't know if any of you have had laryngitis before or lost your voice, But there's been a couple of times I've had really bad laryngitis, and this time I had surgery on my tonsils, so I couldn't just go around talking much or screaming. I'm a very talkative person, for those that know me in the audience. So when I'm not able to talk or communicate or voice who I am, I feel very powerless. And I'll never forget how powerless I felt in that moment and how voiceless I felt. I just wanted to go into a room and scream into a pillow, and I couldn't even do that. So the funeral happens, and the funeral happens, and even years later, I'll make a post, remembering my cousin, and there's still people from my high school class that I graduated with. They'll be like, I didn't know he passed away from suicide. There's been a lot of misinformation put out there, a lot of things put out there to cover up what really happened, and why it happened. So, as much as this has caused me a lot of pain, I still sometimes at least try to focus on the positives of this. I think this radically changed me as a queer and trans person, as much as I don't want to admit it, but it did. And then recently, at the beginning of this month, I lost my mother, and I had to go back home to Indiana. And these people that I've avoided for 7 years that are connected to a ton of trauma, I've got to be around. So I avoid them during the viewing, I avoid them during my mother's funeral, and at the end of the funeral, I'm up at my mother's casket just trying to get some roses off of it. And my aunt comes up from behind me and non-consensually touches my arm and doesn't stop and tells me she's sorry about the passing of my mother and that she really missed me at my cousin's viewing. That triggered a lot for me that day. Felt kind of like more crap being piled on top of an already really bad situation. And I think that's the main thing about this whole story is the gaslighting that's gone on. I remember immediately getting in my car after that happened and calling a friend that knew about it and said, I just need you to tell me that I'm not crazy, that like I was really barred from this viewing because someone else is saying otherwise now. So despite all of that, I do think there are some positives, though, that came from this. I did LGBTQ education in higher ed for a while, and that was because of my cousin's passing, because I knew I didn't have resources growing up in rural Indiana, and that other people were closeted forcefully as well. It's also shown me how I'm resilient. As much as I love or hate it, I'm very resilient as a queer and trans person because of this happening. Now, after my cousin's passing, I don't know what your religious beliefs are. I'm personally agnostic. I can't prove it. I can't deny it. I can't provide evidence. I had some paranormal experiences. I can't for sure say it whether or not it was him. I'm not even going to go into those, though. I'm going to tell you about the dream that I had about a month after he passed. We were backstage in our high school auditorium for like a theater, for a play. And we were just talking about something backstage in this dream. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "It's so nice up here." And so wherever he's at, I hope he's in peace. Thank you.